All right, so I had a dog post shirt on. I was out and about in another state, and I had an Ohio State guy come up to me and say, "Oh, what's that mean? All this stuff." Then he starts talking about the Ohio State Georgia game, and I mean I've heard this so many times online. And then we have a rule at Dog Post, and that is that generally we do not engage. What I mean by that is when you're when you're around people who ask you what you think, they really are typically doing that so they can tell you what they think, which is fine. I mean, this is what we're in now. I mean, it's a world of social media. We love subscribers at Dog Post over on the site. This guy goes into the whole thing about the game changed when Marvin Harrison went out. And I just was like, oh man, okay, whatever. And it got me to this question, which is this: is Ohio State ever going to get over that game? Which we've already talked about that. My question is as follows, okay? Do you think that Georgia will ever get past Tua's throw to Devonta Smith? And I'm not sure that they will. I mean, that was one of the most iconic plays in college football history. It's not coming up for me. Is it now? There it is. Okay, good. Very good. Very good. I was getting concerned. Yeah, I mean, like if you look at this picture, this is my image from that moment. This is Devonta Smith, former Georgia commit, Devonta Smith, with Tucker Highs, uh, Dominique Sanders, and oh man, Malcolm Parrish. I can't remember what high school Malcolm went to. Of course, I went to Tucker, so there's that. And this moment, I think for a long time allowed people to get their full Larry Munson on. And if you don't know what that means, if you're an Alabama fan or an Ohio State fan, you don't quite understand what that means. That's Georgia's long time, or if you're under 21, that's Georgia's long time radio call guy that those of us in the state and the surrounding areas listened to as children as we grew up. And I wondered, is Georgia past that moment yet? We've seen two national championships since that time. One against Alabama, and yesterday or 2 days ago was second and 26, and you get all the Alabama people with their stuff, which is fine, whatever. They can celebrate, and they should. That's one of the most recent national championships. If you order double dogs today, for those of you who are, just joining in, tuning in, you're going to get confetti sent to you from the game. This is actual real confetti, but you know those three programs have played for the national championship more often than anybody else lately, combined. And how tough a loss was the Ohio State loss versus the Alabama loss for Georgia? I mean, how tough was, this moment that I showed you earlier with Devonta Smith versus this moment right here in the book? That's Darius Smith trying to block Noah Ruggles' game-winning field goal attempt. Which one was more difficult to deal with? Okay, as a fan base, I would argue that Georgia's loss to Alabama was tougher, and here's why. First of all, it was in the national championship game. Secondly, it was a completely terminal play. There was a play after the. I don't really think this matters, but there was a play after the Noah Ruggles miss, and two, um, I wouldn't say this was peak Alabama, but it was really close to that. And these two teams colliding was really I'm still looking at the image. I'll put it up. I know y'all are going to just make so many comments about me putting the image up, but I'm sorry that, this is what it is, but it's what it is. But which do you think was more, bad? I mean, it was worse, harder to get over. I think for Georgia, and I think this will be the case with Ohio State eventually here. Um, I think for Georgia, that was all alleviated after winning the national championship against Alabama. I mean, we write about this a lot in Dog Struction. You've seen, we got Dog Struction available too. Y'all seen me talk about that a lot. And Keeley's moment, I mean, this is really an iconic moment in college football history, just the same way that Devonta's play right here was iconic. I mean, so we're talking about two huge moments in college football history. And, you know, disappointment is hard to get past. Um, Disappointment is hard to get past. And there's been no shortage of disappointment for Georgia this century. I mean, when you talk about not being able to play for the national championship because of the way the rules were written in 2002 and 2007, the loss to Alabama in one of the most, I would say, gut wrenching ways to lose was in 2012. And then, the loss in the Devonta Smith, all those situations cost Georgia a national championship. No doubt, Ohio State losing that game to Georgia cost them a national championship, in my opinion. In my opinion. But which do you think is the more, is the most damaging of the two? And again, right now, I think Ohio State's loss to Georgia is worse, and I can say that because we are 6 years later, and in that 6 years, of course, in 17, Georgia played for the national championship and won the SEC. In 18, they lost in the SEC championship game and then the Sugar Bowl. 19, they lose in the SEC championship game but win the Sugar Bowl. 20, they win the Peach Bowl. 21, they win the national championship. And then 22, they win the national championship again. We don't know what these next 5 years for Ohio State will be like. They are coming into a Big Ten that is a different situation than has always been in the past. Georgia, nothing changed from the time in terms of broad strokes. Nothing changed from the moment Georgia lost the national championship game against Alabama. A season later, Alabama would go on to lose to Clemson. But, you know, I was talking to a friend of mine, a Clemson guy, and I'm not going to name the person because some of y'all actually know this person. And he said from the moment Georgia and Clemson got to Charlotte, they've been going in opposite directions, Georgia and Clemson. I would argue, although that is very acutely correct, I would argue that Clemson has sort of been sliding since they got to New Orleans in 2019. They just have never been the same program since. And It's tough though, because, we're talking about Ohio State with their tough loss to Georgia. Clemson suffered a brutal loss to Ohio State after surviving them the year before. I mean, Clemson was absolutely blown out by Ohio State. And the fact of the matter is, once you get to sort of this level of play where, you've got gold trophies uh, at the end of the game that are handed out, or, any sort of trophy that really matters, the losses and the wins are magnified. They just are. It's what it is. And um, I think, to me, the Ohio State loss is tougher. They are they are really down in the dumps about that. I think in 17 it was the beginning of something for Georgia. Jake Fromm was coming back. Nick and Sony were not, but as we saw in 18, that was a very good Georgia team. I mean, that's all there is to it. We don't know what the future holds for Ohio State. If you remember this time a year ago, we all really felt like, okay, Ohio State and Alabama should be playing for the national championship. That's what I thought. That Georgia would get into the playoff with somebody else. I thought it would be Utah. It turned out that was not going to be the case. But we knew moving forward after the 17 loss to Alabama that Georgia was at the start of things. Ohio State is at least in the middle, if not, the later ends of the start, because, Ryan Day has seen, Justin come in, and they have played for the national championship and lost with Justin in a blowout. I mean, he's had another spectacular quarterback for the last 2 years, CJ Stroud. So, Ryan Day has seen, college football playoff in 18, if I'm not mistaken, a tough loss right at the end of Clemson. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. Uh, no, excuse me, tough loss to Clemson in 19 with Justin. And then Justin in 20, losing in the national championship game to Alabama, really lopsided score. And then 21, not getting into the playoff because of loss to Michigan. And then getting into the playoffs with a loss to Michigan and just a gut wrenching loss to Georgia. So I don't know, what the future will be for Ohio State. I think for them, it's not quite the same as it was for Georgia in 17. Anyway, you tell me what you think was worse of the two because they were both pretty tough.